Brethren, it's a joy to be again together in the house of the Lord. After some of us, we have been sick, right? And some of us, we may not be fully recovered. My voice is not fully recovered, but I'm very thankful for the microphone that we can use. And I was doing a little bit of research, and it says that most of us, we have problems with breathing. And it's not only COVID, but it's our bad posture. As we are standing or sitting, it says, Emma Ferris, physiotherapist and breathing coach with the breath effect, says that 80% of the population have a breathing dysfunction and have developed poor techniques throughout the years. And most likely, some of us, we might be among those 80%. So what can we do? Shall we still continue that way when we sit? Or stay straight? Be straight. I'm so thankful when I started doing Bible work, one older sister came to me and says, hey, you are sitting this way. You need to stay straight. You need to breathe correctly. We need to form good habits, brothers and sisters. It says in Counsels for the Church that superficial breathing soon becomes a habit, and the lungs lose their power to expand. And we develop a bad habit throughout our lives. And that's not a good habit. And it creates a heavy weight on our spine. If we are that way, it says that it's a weight of 42 pounds, depending on our own weight, the weight that we add on our spine just by that, and plus the breathing problems. And we don't want to develop that habit, correct? We want to develop good habits. There are good habits as well. There are good habits, for example, to speak well of others. The world is full of people that speak bad about each other, correct? And we want as Christians, by the grace of God, to speak good about others. It says, cultivate the habit of speaking well of others. Dwell upon good qualities of those with whom you associate, and see as little as possible of their errors and failings. So there are good habits we can develop as well. There is another habit we can develop. It says the habit of doing right is wanting. Everything from the morning, we need to start doing right things, doing it right. It says it's wanting. Now, question comes, how can we form good habits? Someone says through practice. What are the thoughts? How can we form good habits? Because bad habits are forming easily, correct? We don't need much effort to put there. How can we form good habits? Consistency. Discipline. So through these three words that were mentioned already, it sounds that it takes us out of the comfort zone. Don't look for comfort. If we look for comfort, do you think we'll develop good habits? If we look for our own comfort, in different ways we may look for our own comfort, do you think that's a good thing to develop good habits? It says that John the Baptist, the greatest prophet that ever existed, he says it was his choice to forego the enjoyments and luxuries of city life for the stern discipline of the wilderness. Here, his surroundings were favorable to habits of simplicity and self-denial. And those were good habits. He went there. He says that he didn't have a large wardrobe, correct? He didn't have many clothes there. What can I choose? He didn't have much food. What did he eat? He says locusts and wild honey. He didn't have to say, oh, I don't want this or that. He had a simple diet. He developed habits of simplicity and self-denial. Now, from habits, people can go to traditions, and that's a big problem. What traditions do we find in the Bible? When you think of traditions in the Bible, do you think of something good or something not that good? Traditions in the Bible. Yes. Like what traditions are we thinking? Whom do we think that they were holding traditions in the Bible? The Pharisees. Were their traditions good? All of them. They had some problems. It says that John the Baptist wanted to be away from habits that were perpetuated or customs and became traditions. He says the greater portion of his life was spent in the wilderness that he might not be influenced by beholding the lax piety of the priests and rabbis or by learning their maxims and traditions through which right principles were perverted and belittled. There were maxims and traditions people repeated and was wrong. And John the Baptist wanted to stay away from those traditions. How many of their traditions survived? How many people are doing what the Pharisees were doing 2,000 years ago? How many traditions survive over time? Some questions to analyze, and there are books that are written recently. Says there are dying traditions, concerns. There are books I put here: dying traditions, modernity and reinventing of the tradition, backing into the future, reinventing family traditions in the virtual era, reinventing the invention of tradition, disappearing world. There are so many things from the past that are not happening in the present anymore. They are gone. Traditions are gone. One tradition, it says that it's called now like a tradition, spanking the children. Have you been spanked by your parents? The science today calls this a tradition. It's something old, you know? But we know that the Bible says it's good to apply the stuff to the child, correct? I want to ask you about this civilization. How many of us have heard about the Etruscans? I see 1, 2, 3 hands raised. Where were the Etruscans living? They lived in Italy even before the Roman Empire. If we look 700 BC, 500 BC, that's even kind of before the Babylonian Empire came to its greatness. Now, where are the Etruscans now? Where is their civilization? Where are their traditions and customs? It's gone. It's wiped off. Have you heard about this civilization, the Nok civilization? It's in Africa, between Nigeria and Benin, that area. And it's gone about 1,000 years ago. We don't know how they were eating, how they were dressing, what habits they had, what customs, what traditions. They are gone. Now, everybody heard about the Babylonian civilization. And we know some things from the Bible. How many of their practices and traditions are still carried on? Some, sadly, in the modern world, like Christmas and Easter, and some influences are still permeating in the Christianity. But everything is gone from them. What about the Indus Civilization? How many traditions do you recall from them still going on? Or Khmer Empire in Cambodia. Have you heard about that? I found very interesting. Wow, that's gone. Their habits, their customs, their traditions are gone. Anasazi, who have been in New Mexico to see Anasazi reminiscences and ruins of that civilization there. It's here in the United States. Or a little bit south in Central America, the Olmec civilization in Mexico. It's gone. Their habits, their customs, their traditions are gone. Aksumite Empire in Ethiopia, it's gone. Their traditions, their habits are gone. Thousands of years are wiped off. The Minoans in Crete are wiped off. The Maya civilization, it's wiped off. We barely find some ruins to understand about them a little bit. Easter Island, and those interesting statues, people don't know what and how they were worshiping, or what they were doing with those heads there. You know, it's interesting. The life story of every generation goes away, off. Thousands of years of history, brothers and sisters, are gone. I love this. Is one of my favorite paragraphs by one Romanian author, beautiful in its time. Sister Zenobia Nikolica, she wrote, "The life story of every human being will remain an unsolved mystery, upon which sooner or later the forgetfulness of the next generations takes place. However, there is someone who doesn't forget. Through the eyes of an unshakable faith, we remain remembered in the memory of our Creator, which will renew his entire creation one day." God will renew entire creation. Thousands and millions of people that died, their generations died. One day will be resurrected, some for everlasting life and some for everlasting contempt and death. Now, if generations are fading away, their customs are fading away, their traditions are fading away, we don't even remember about them. Lucky we are if you remember the name of your great-grandpa. Who remembers the name of your great-grandpa? Let's not go even further than 1,000 years, just 100 years. Great-grandpa. Do you remember? One brother remembers. Some of us, we may not. And then if we try to do the exercise, great-great-grandpa, oh, go hard. Brethren, there's so much wiped off with the traditions and practices of every civilization. But there is a custom that no matter how many civilizations existed in this world, no matter how many nations, how many empires, there is a custom that resisted over the centuries, and that is by the grace of God. I made all this introduction just to understand how perishable the human society is. We are, and 100 years later, we are not, we forget about everything. But there is a custom, and I want to emphasize with this, that stands for 6,000 years, and it's perpetuated over thousands of years. And this custom is the day that God gave us. In Luke chapter 4:16, it says, "He came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read." Brethren, this custom, it still carries on. Generations have been wiped off. Empires wiped off. But this day, the Sabbath day, we can thank God that was never forgotten. We can thank so much. And Jesus had not this custom only in his town. He says that he went into Capernaum, and on the Sabbath days, he was going there. How was this that this was his custom? It's very simple. We are all used with the fourth commandment, where it says, "Remember, God the Creator made everything." And in the Sabbath day, what did he do? He rested. And in Genesis 2, verse 3, do you know why the Sabbath day is blessed? Verse 3, why is it blessed? Because God rested in that day, and God gave it to us. And it says in Testimonies to Ministers, when the foundations of the earth was laid, the foundation of the Sabbath was laid also. And Sabbath was very important. It says in Patriarchs and Prophets, like the Sabbath, the week originated at creation, and it has been preserved thousands of years and brought down to us through Bible history. Nations have died. Their buildings are gone, only some ruins, but the Sabbath has been preserved by God down to us through Bible history. Now, this is actually the true ground that we need to worship God. Says John Andrews in the book History of the Sabbath, the true ground of divine worship, not of that on the seventh day merely, but of all worship, is found in the distinction between the Creator and his creatures. This great fact can never become obsolete and must never be forgotten. The Sabbath is the memorial of his creative power. The Sabbath calls our thoughts through nature. and we can hear his voice. And God says, if you want to worship me, there is no other day you can worship me. It's only the Sabbath day. And this is the sign, says, that I am your God. All who keep the 7-day Sabbath signify that they are worshippers of Jehovah. This is a memorial of creation. We ever need to keep in mind, it's a sacred memorial, says in sacred history, medical ministry. It's a perpetual covenant, says God. And what shall we do with the Sabbath day? To reform, brethren. It says, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath. We all know this verse. It talks about a reformation on the Sabbath. It talks about the people of God reforming the Sabbath. Do you think you reformed the Sabbath? Do you think we fully reformed? You know, Satan brings a lot of efforts to destroy the Sabbath of creation. And we'll see 4 major ways how Satan tries to destroy the Sabbath. And number 1, it's exactly by corrupting the chosen people of God. The people of Israel were corrupted in such a way by Satan that God says in the prophecy that my Sabbaths, they greatly polluted. Brothers and sisters, are we in a risk to pollute the Sabbath sometimes? Yes, we are, brothers and sisters. When our thoughts are going beyond what God says, when our words, when we speak about the things of during the week, when we speak about our jobs, when we speak about our schools, when we speak about our houses, about even about remodeling our church, this is not to be in the Sabbath day. When we speak about our cars, about our animals or something, we are not to do this. God says we should not pollute Sabbath. Satan aimed, says in Patriarchs and Prophets, to tear down this great memorial. If men could be led to forget their Creator, they would make no effort to resist the power of evil, and Satan would be sure of his prey. If Satan helps us to break the Sabbath and to forget the Creator, Satan is sure of his prey. Number 1, how Satan was trying is to corrupt the people of God. And we should pray to God to stay uncorrupted. Second, Satan brought other Sabbaths or no Sabbaths at all. What kind of Sabbath was brought? A false Sabbath. Says in Patriarchs and Prophets, by causing men to violate the second commandment, Satan aimed to degrade their conception of the divine being. By setting aside the fourth, he would cause them to forget God altogether. The Sabbath memorial declaring who the living God is, the creator of the heavens and the earth, has been torn down, and a false Sabbath could not be a true standard. What is this false Sabbath? Sunday, correct? Sunday worship. It says in selected messages, the wicked will be distinguished by their efforts to tear down the Creator's memorial, to exalt the institution of Rome. How many Christians do you know they worship Sunday? How many? According to the statistics, Christianity counts about 2.38 billion people. About 1/3 of the world's population today is Christian. And most of Christians, says traditionally, they worship on Sunday. And I think we are all familiar when this change happened, correct? When did it happen? 321. Who did that change? Constantine the Great. In less than 1 second, you put on Google, you say, when was the Sabbath changed to Sunday? And it gives you more than 12 million results of how this happened. And you can check in the history. What's so interesting, says in great controversy, that the arrogant claims of the popery and what brought the Dark Ages, says it was in behalf of the Sunday that the popery first asserted its arrogant claims. It was on behalf of the Sunday. Keep this in mind. I was so curious to see what is that one, see the appendix. I went to the appendix and were given a couple of references there, a couple of books, a couple of sources where we find a little bit more details about how the papacy started enforcing the Sunday instead of Sabbath. Many different resources, and something which caught the attention was this one by Christopher B. Coleman, which says the treatise of Lorenzo Valla on the donation of Constantine. I was curious, what is this donation of Constantine? We all know that Constantine the Great did the change between the Sabbath and Sunday. And he says that Constantine donated, he says, was a donation. Constantine was contemporary with Pope Sylvester I. In 314, 335, this is when Pope Sylvester lived. And he says that the Roman Emperor Constantine granted great bestowal of vast territory and spiritual and temporal power to the Pope. So the Pope would have great influence, political and religious. And this was a forgery, was not discovered until the 15th century by Mr. Lorenzo Valla. And when this was discovered, that was a forgery. But for about 10 centuries, the popes used that donation of Constantine, saying, we have power, political, religious, territory, and spiritual. And the popes were enforcing, and says the spirit of prophecy, it was in behalf on Sunday that the popery first asserted its arrogant claims. On the Sunday. And no wonder why the majority of the Christians are keeping Sunday. So this was the very first fake Sabbath which Satan introduced, 321. What was the second fake Sabbath that Satan introduced for other part of the world? Friday. How many people worship Friday? Muslims, about 2 billion people, worship another day. So we said Satan tries to put down the Sabbath, bringing false Sabbaths, Sunday or Friday, and there are millions or billions of other religions, like Hinduism, they don't have even a day of worship. They were deluded by Satan in such a way, not even a day of worship. Buddhism, the fourth major religion of the world, 4 million people, they do not observe a weekly holiday either. Satan deluded everything. Sikhism, Sikhs, they do not observe a Sabbath. Shintoism in Japan, there is no special day of the week for worship in Shinto. Look how much Satan was trying to tear down the memorial of God's creation. Number one, corrupting the chosen people of God. Number two, other Sabbaths or no Sabbaths at all. And number three, he tries to change the length of the week. I was surprised to find out that in Russia, in 1930s, they tried to make a 5-day week, uninterrupted week. You work 4 days and you rest the 5th day. But nobody in the family has the same day of rest. The husband would work 4 days, would rest the 5th day. The wife would start working depending on the company. And he says there was problem between family members, and the factory overseers realized that machines were breaking down more frequently. So the Russians changed. That was 1930s. And then later they changed to a 6th day, a week made of 6 days, 5 weeks in a month. And eventually they gave up. In 1940s, they went back to the 7-day week. We find evidences that the Etruscans, they had an 8-day week. Everything different, but not exactly as God created. 8-day week, 8-day market week. As well, we find in the Baltic languages, Estonia, Lithuania, Lithuania, or even in Wales, in England, in United Kingdom, they were having a 9-day week. Everything different, not as God ordained. In France, probably the most known for us is when they were trying to do the week how long? 10 days. It says that they were worshiping, the institutions of the Bible were abolished. The weekly rest day was set aside, and instead, every 10th day was devoted to reveling and blasphemy. And he says there are records in the seventh day, you count the days, and in the seventh day, the animals, when they were plowing the ground, the animals were falling down tired. Until the France has to realize we cannot have a 10 days week. We have to go back to the 7th day. There is this gentleman from New York, Dan Nosovich, in 2015. He says, why can't we get rid of the 7-day week? So many attempts around the world to change the length of the week. Why can't we get rid of the 7-day week length? Why cannot the nations change the length of the week? As much as they try. Why is this impossibility? Because God himself measured off the first week as a sample for successive weeks to the close of time. And as many attempts they would try to make 5 days, 6 days, 8 days, 9 days, 10 days, it doesn't work because God himself measured off the first week as a sample. And that's why it can never be changed. Satan was trying to corrupt the people of God, to put other Sabbaths, or to change the length of the week. And most recently, in the last century, something that many Christians had fallen into this trap, the oppositions of science. There are many Christians, Protestants, they don't take Genesis serious. They don't take Genesis serious. There are Christian leaders, they don't believe that God created the world in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days. Literal days, each one of them of 24 hours. It says in Patriarchs and Prophets, but the assumption that the events of the first week required thousands upon thousands of years strikes directly at the foundation of the fourth commandment. Continuing in Patriarchs and Prophets, it says, geologists claim to find evidences both of man and animals, petrified trees, and led many, we go back to the bottom of the slide, led many professed Bible believers to adopt the position that the days of creation were vast, indefinite periods. What a lie. And even professed Christians believe that. They don't take Genesis serious. I put some of the Christian leaders. Probably everybody knows this Christian leader. Look what he said in 2014. It says, when we read about creation in Genesis, we risk imagining God as a magician with a magic wand, able to make everything, but it is not so. And this is the man coming from an institution which claims that they are vicars of Jesus, keeping the place of Jesus on this earth. And how can you deny the very Bible, which Jesus says, in the beginning, it was not so? Talking about marriage, man and wife. That's another subject. And this is not something new if you think only in 2014. A previous Christian leader, 1996, he says, Vatican thinking evolves. The Pope gives his blessing to natural selection, though man's souls remains beyond science research. And right down there he says, John Paul does not interpret the Bible literally. Christian leaders. Now, this Christian author, Farid Abu Rahman, a wonderful book I recommend, and God Said. I recommend you to read that book. If we say that Genesis is not important, we are no longer taking the whole Bible seriously. If you find a Christian that has doubts that God created in 24 hours each day, you need to talk seriously with them. God has precise time. When I was in college, I was exposed to many evolutionistic ideas, geology, and humanist ideas. And one day, as I was walking through the hallways, going up to the library in the college, I see a very old gentleman, very old man. And I asked one of my classmates, "Who's this? Do you know him? He's struggling so much to climb the stairs to the third story." And he says, "Oh, this is Mr. Virgil Gerbacha. He's professor, you remember?" I say, "Yes, I read some of his books. We had to pass the exams from his books." And I say, "Okay, and if he's retired in his 90s, why is he struggling to come up here?" And he says, "Well, his dream is to die here in the college building." And I said, "For what?" "In the name of the science." Science that deluded so many souls. Science that puts in the mind of the young people that God doesn't exist. Science that says that God did not create this world in 6 days, 24 hours. Science that deludes everything and makes everything relative. The young generation says, who says what is right and what is wrong? And then Sister White writes in messages to young people, how terrible is to stand by the coffin of one who has rejected the appeals of divine mercy. How terrible to say, here is a life lost. You can write many books in this world. You can be a professor. You can have a name. But how terrible is to stand by the coffin of someone who has rejected the appeals of divine mercy. How terrible to say, God gave a life to this person, and this is lost. That's why it's an appeal for us. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth. Satan tries to destroy the Sabbath, corrupting the people of God, choosing other Sabbaths for millions and billions of people, changing the length of the week, the science opposing. But you know what? In conclusion, I want to say something beautiful. I want to say something precious. God is always first. I don't remember when Brother Britton was telling this in missionary school. He says, even though Charles Darwin brought the theory of evolution and his first edition of Origin of Species was printed in 1859, when was the first angel's message proclaimed? Which year? 1833 and then 1844, 43 and reinforced. So that is already before 1859. God is first. And what does it say in the first angel's message? Worship whom? Him that made the heaven and the earth and the sea and the foundations of the earth. And the pioneers with William Miller, they proclaimed that God is the creator. They started before Charles Darwin came with his theory. God is always first. And God gave us the Sabbath. The Sabbath reminds of our Creator. It says in manuscript 162, let there be no robbery of God in tithes and offerings, no desecration of his holy time. God has placed in our charge. Let us keep it pure and holy. What are we to do with this memorial of creation? It says in Great Controversy, we are to exalt the Sabbath as the Creator's memorial and the sign of his authority. Brothers and sisters, this next paragraph is so special. It says, had the Sabbath been universally kept, and men's thoughts and affections would have been led to the Creator as the object of reverence and worship, and they would never have been an idolater, an atheist, or an infidel if the Sabbath was kept. And that's what God says, to keep the Sabbath, to reform the Sabbath. How long will this custom last? 6,000 years, 7,000 years? How long? It says, will endure through eternal ages. And something very precious, it says, the Sabbath is a golden clasp that unites God and his people. He says, this is the sign. And God wants to be with us forever on the new earth, the new heavens and the new earth. And from one Sabbath to another shall all flesh come to worship me. What a joy. What a privilege. And I know some of us were baptized even during a Sabbath day that fixes our choice. And this will be our closing hymn. Oh, happy day that fixes our choice. And what a happy day is the Sabbath day when we can praise the Lord and when we gladly come together and unites us together with God. May God help us with that. Amen.